The Fed just broke, and it's heading toward the same fate as every reserve currency in history. The Spanish dollar. The Dutch guilder. The British pound. Each one of them believed they were untouchable. Permanent. Unshakable. And every single one of them was wrong. Right now, the Federal Reserve is repeating the exact same mistakes that destroyed them all. I know what you're thinking. Here we go again. Another doom and gloom warning. But stay with me, because what I'm about to show you isn't speculation. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's history. It's economics. And once you see the pattern, once you truly understand what's unfolding, you'll realize this isn't fear-mongering, it's realism. The Spanish dollar ruled global trade for over 300 years, from the 1500s to the 1800s. If you wanted to do international business, you used Spanish silver. It was the world's reserve currency. Spain was the global superpower. They controlled vast territories. Gold and silver poured in from the Americas. Wealth seemed endless. And then, it collapsed. Why? Because Spain did exactly what the United States is doing today. They debased their currency. They mixed cheaper metals into their coins. They printed more money than their economy could support. They fought expensive wars they couldn't afford. They lived beyond their means. And eventually, the world lost confidence. Trade shifted. Trust vanished. And the empire fell. They printed more money than they had real wealth to back it up. They fought expensive wars they couldn't afford. They ran massive deficits. And eventually, the rest of the world lost confidence. Merchants stopped accepting Spanish currency. Other nations switched to different forms of money. And Spain went from global superpower to irrelevant in less than a century. Then came the Dutch guilder. The Netherlands became the financial center of the world in the 1600s and 1700s. Amsterdam was where everyone did business. The guilder was the currency everyone wanted. The Dutch had the most advanced financial system in the world. They invented many of the banking practices we still use today. But the same pattern repeated. The Dutch got involved in expensive wars. They ran up debts. They started printing money to cover their obligations. Inflation eroded the value of the guilder. And by the late 1700s, the British pound had replaced it as the dominant global currency. Which brings us to the British pound. For over 100 years, from the early 1800s to the mid-1900s, the pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. The British Empire spanned the globe. The sun never set on British territories. If you wanted to trade internationally, you did it in pounds. The Bank of England was the most powerful financial institution in the world. London was the center of global finance. Britain seemed invincible. And then 2 world wars and massive government spending destroyed their finances. They printed money to fund the war effort. They racked up enormous debts. They tried to maintain their empire while their economy crumbled. And by 1944, at the Bretton Woods Conference, the world officially moved from the pound to the dollar as the global reserve currency. The transition wasn't instant. It took decades, but once it started, it was inevitable. By the 1970s, the pound was just another currency. Britain went from global superpower to struggling economy dealing with inflation and decline. Now, here's what all of these currency collapses have in common, and pay attention because this is the pattern that's repeating right now with the dollar. Pattern number 1, excessive money printing. Every single failed reserve currency printed more money than their economy could support. They created currency out of thin air to fund government spending, wars, and obligations they couldn't afford. And every time, this led to inflation and loss of confidence. Pattern number 2, unsustainable debt. Spain, the Netherlands, Britain. They all accumulated massive debts they couldn't repay. They borrowed from future generations to fund current spending. And eventually, the debt became so large that it was mathematically impossible to pay back. Pattern number 3, military overreach. Every dying empire tries to maintain its power through military force. They fight expensive wars in distant lands. They station troops all over the world. They pour resources into defense spending while their domestic economy suffers. This accelerates the financial collapse. Pattern number 4, loss of manufacturing and productive capacity. Reserve currency nations stop making things. They become service economies. They import more than they export. They live beyond their means because the world accepts their currency. But this makes them vulnerable. When the currency loses its status, they have nothing real to fall back on. Pattern number 5, denial until it's too late. The people living through these collapses never see it coming. The Spanish thought their empire would last forever. The Dutch believed Amsterdam would always be the financial center. The British couldn't imagine a world where the pound wasn't dominant. Everyone thinks their currency is different, is special, is permanent. Until it's not. Now, let me show you how the United States and the Federal Reserve are following this exact same pattern. Money printing. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet was under $1 trillion in 2008. Today, it's over $7 trillion. They've created trillions of dollars out of thin air in just 15 years. During COVID alone, they printed $4 trillion. That's 40% of all dollars in existence created in just 2 years. And they're still doing it. Every time there's a crisis, every time the economy wobbles, every time the stock market drops, what does the Fed do? They print more money. They call it quantitative easing or emergency liquidity or whatever technical term makes it sound responsible. But it's just printing money, creating dollars that didn't exist before. What does this cause? Inflation. Your grocery bill is higher. Your rent is higher. Your car costs more. Your insurance premiums went up. Everything costs more because there are more dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services. The Fed will tell you inflation is transitory. They'll say it's under control. They'll point to their preferred metrics that show 3 or 4% inflation. But that's not what real people experience. Real inflation, the inflation you feel in your daily life, is much higher. Housing costs are up 30 to 40% in the last 5 years. Food is up 25% or more. Energy costs have skyrocketed. Healthcare is more expensive every year. Education costs keep climbing. The real inflation rate, if measured honestly, is probably 10 to 15% per year. Your dollar is losing value constantly. Unsustainable debt. The United States has $36 trillion in national debt. Let me say that again, $36 trillion. That's larger than the entire US economy. We owe more than we produce in a year, and it's growing by over $2 trillion every year. Every single year, we add another $2 trillion to the debt. That's not sustainable. That's not responsible. That's a country living far beyond its means. The interest on that debt is now over $1 trillion per year. Think about that. We're paying $1 trillion just in interest, not paying down the principal, just interest. That's more than we spend on defense, more than we spend on education, more than most government programs. And as interest rates stay elevated, that interest cost will keep growing. At some point, and we're getting close, the interest on the debt becomes so large that it crowds out everything else. We can't afford social programs. We can't afford infrastructure. We can't afford anything except paying interest to our creditors. What happens then? We have 3 choices. Default on the debt and destroy our credibility, cut government spending dramatically and cause massive economic pain, or print money to pay the debt and cause inflation. Which one do you think they'll choose? Based on history, based on what they've done every time before, they'll print. They always print because printing is the politically easy option. It's the hidden tax that most people don't understand. Military overreach. The United States has military bases in over 80 countries. We spend more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. We're involved in conflicts all over the world. We're trying to maintain global dominance through military power, but we can't afford it. Every war, every conflict, every military operation costs money we don't have. Afghanistan and Iraq cost trillions of dollars. Our ongoing military commitments cost hundreds of billions every year. And for what? Are we safer? Are we more prosperous? Or are we just bleeding resources while our infrastructure crumbles and our economy weakens? This is exactly what happened to Britain. They tried to maintain their empire after World War II, even though they were bankrupt. They kept troops stationed around the world while their economy collapsed at home, and it accelerated their decline. We're doing the same thing, trying to be the world's policeman while we can't even fix the roads in our own country. Loss of manufacturing. America used to make things. We were the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. We produced cars, steel, electronics, machinery, everything. We exported more than we imported. We had a trade surplus. Not anymore. We've outsourced most of our manufacturing to China and other countries. We import far more than we export. We run a massive trade deficit every year. We consume more than we produce. The only reason we can get away with this is because the dollar is the reserve currency. Other countries accept our dollars in exchange for their real goods and services. But when the dollar loses that status, when other countries stop accepting dollars, we're in trouble. We'll actually have to produce things to trade for the things we want, and we've lost that capacity. Denial. Talk to the average American about the dollar losing reserve currency status and they'll look at you like you're crazy. The dollar is strong. America is powerful. This could never happen to us. That's the same thing the Spanish said, the same thing the Dutch said, the same thing the British said. Everyone thinks their currency is permanent until the day it's not. And there are already clear signs that the dollar's dominance is ending, but most people aren't paying attention. China and Russia are conducting bilateral trade in their own currencies, completely bypassing the dollar. The BRICS nations are building an alternative financial system. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil sales. Central banks around the world are reducing their dollar reserves and buying gold instead. The writing is on the wall. The dollar's days as the sole global reserve currency are numbered. It might not happen overnight. It might take 5 or 10 or 15 years, but the process has already started. And once it reaches a tipping point, the decline will accelerate rapidly. So what does this mean for you? What happens when the dollar loses reserve currency status? First, massive inflation. When other countries don't need dollars anymore, all those dollars currently held overseas will come flooding back to America. There are trillions of dollars in foreign reserves, in international transactions, in global trade. When those dollars return home, when they're not needed abroad anymore, we'll have way too many dollars chasing too few goods. This is called reverse currency flow, and it causes hyperinflation. We're talking about prices doubling every few months, your savings getting cut in half, your paycheck buying less and less. This is what happened in Weimar Germany, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela. It can happen here. Second, interest rates will spike. Right now, the US can borrow money relatively cheaply because there's always demand for treasury bonds. Foreign countries need dollars, so they buy our debt. But when they don't need dollars anymore, who's going to buy treasury bonds at 4 or 5% interest? The government will have to offer much higher rates to attract buyers, maybe 10%, maybe 15%, maybe higher. And those higher rates will devastate the economy. Mortgages become unaffordable. Business loans dry up. The stock market crashes. Everything that depended on cheap credit collapses. Third, standard of living declines dramatically. Americans are used to abundance. Cheap goods from China. Affordable imports from around the world. Easy access to products and services. All of this is possible because the world accepts our dollars. When that ends, when we have to actually trade things of value for imports, our standard of living will drop. Fewer imports means higher prices. It means less selection. It means doing without things we've taken for granted. The average American will become significantly poorer in real terms, not because of a recession or a job loss, but because the purchasing power of the dollar has been destroyed. Fourth, social and political instability. When people can't afford food, when their savings are worthless, when their retirement is gone, they get angry. They protest. They riot. We've seen this pattern in every country that's experienced currency collapse. The social fabric tears apart. Politicians will look for scapegoats. They'll blame other countries, immigrants, corporations, anyone except themselves and their policies. We'll see more polarization, more extremism, more conflict. A currency collapse isn't just an economic event, it's a social and political earthquake. Now, the Federal Reserve knows all of this. They're not stupid. They understand the history. They know the patterns. So why are they making the same mistakes? Because they're trapped. They have no good options. They're managing decline and trying to delay the inevitable for as long as possible. Here's their dilemma. If they stop printing money, if they let interest rates rise to where they should naturally be, the economy crashes, the stock market collapses, real estate crashes, banks fail, unemployment spikes, and recession turns into depression. Politically, this is unacceptable. No politician will get re-elected if they allow that to happen. But if they keep printing money, if they keep interest rates artificially low, they create inflation. They destroy the currency. They set up the conditions for an even worse crisis down the road. So they've chosen the slow death over the quick death. They're printing money and hoping they can manage the inflation. They're trying to keep the system limping along for as long as possible. They're kicking the can down the road and praying that somehow, someway, something changes and they can avoid the inevitable, but it won't work. It never works. Every central bank in history that has tried this strategy has failed. The laws of economics don't care about good intentions or sophisticated models or PhDs from prestigious universities. You can't print prosperity. You can't create wealth out of thin air. You can't borrow your way to riches. These are fundamental truths that never change. So what's the timeline? When does this happen? And that's the trillion-dollar question. Based on historical patterns, based on the speed of de-dollarization, based on the acceleration of money printing and debt accumulation, I believe we're looking at a critical period between now and 2026 to 2028. That doesn't mean the dollar disappears overnight. That doesn't mean we wake up one morning and it's worthless. Currency collapses happen gradually. Then suddenly, there's a long period of slow decline where people deny what's happening, and then there's a tipping point where everything accelerates and the decline becomes rapid and obvious. We're in the slow decline phase now. The tipping point is coming, and based on everything I'm seeing, that tipping point hits sometime in the next 2 to 3 years. Why that time frame? Several converging factors. The US debt will hit $40 trillion by 2027. The interest payments will become unsustainable. The federal budget will be dominated by debt service, leaving no room for anything else. The BRICS nations are launching their alternative currency system in 2025 or early 2026. When that goes live, when countries have a real alternative to the dollar for international trade, the shift will accelerate. Social Security and Medicare are hitting crisis points. The trust funds are running dry. The demographic time bomb is exploding. The government will need to print massive amounts of money to keep these programs funded, which will accelerate inflation. Commercial real estate is collapsing. Regional banks are in serious trouble. We're likely to see another banking crisis in 2025 or 2026, which will require massive Fed intervention and money printing. China is making moves to challenge dollar dominance. They're accumulating gold. They're building trade networks. They're positioning themselves to launch a gold-backed yuan. When that happens, the game changes completely. All of these factors are converging in the 2025 to 2028 time frame. Any one of them could be the catalyst. All of them together create a perfect storm. So what do you do? How do you protect yourself when the reserve currency is failing? First, understand that cash is not safety. Holding dollars, whether in a bank account or under your mattress, is a losing strategy when the currency is being devalued. You need to own real assets, things with intrinsic value that can't be printed or inflated away. Gold and silver are the obvious choices. They've been money for 5,000 years. They hold value through currency collapses. When the dollar was declining in the 1970s, gold went from $35 an ounce to $850. That's a 24 times increase. It preserved wealth while the dollar was being destroyed. Buy physical gold and silver, not paper gold like ETFs, actual coins and bars that you can hold. Store it securely at home or in a private vault. This is your insurance policy against currency collapse. I recommend 20 to 30% of your investable assets in precious metals. That's higher than traditional advice, but we're not in traditional times. We're facing a potential reserve currency failure. You need more protection. Real estate is another option. Land and property are real assets. They have utility. And in an inflationary environment, real estate prices tend to rise in nominal terms, helping preserve wealth. The key is to buy without too much debt. If interest rates spike, you don't want to be stuck with an unaffordable mortgage. Either pay cash or lock in a long-term fixed rate while you can. Stocks in the right companies can work, not just any stocks. You want companies with real assets, low debt, and products people need regardless of economic conditions. Energy companies, agricultural companies, mining companies, utilities. These businesses will continue operating and generating value even if the dollar collapses. Avoid companies that are financial in nature or depend on cheap credit. When the currency fails and interest rates spike, these companies will suffer. Foreign currencies and assets are important for diversification. Don't keep everything denominated in dollars. Open accounts in other countries. Buy property overseas. Invest in foreign stocks and bonds. The Swiss franc, Singapore dollar, Norwegian krone, these are currencies backed by countries with much more responsible fiscal policies than the United States. They won't be immune to global turmoil, but they'll likely hold value better than the dollar. Cryptocurrency is controversial, but worth considering. Bitcoin was literally designed as an alternative to government-controlled fiat currency. It has a fixed supply. No central bank can print more of it. In a world where reserve currencies are failing, Bitcoin could become a store of value. I'm not saying bet everything on crypto. That would be reckless. But 5 to 10% in Bitcoin, stored in a wallet you control, is a reasonable hedge. The key principle is diversification. Don't put all your wealth in any single asset or currency. Spread it across multiple categories. This protects you from any single point of failure. Beyond financial assets, invest in yourself. Skills and knowledge are valuable regardless of what happens to currency. Learn practical skills. Build your professional expertise. Create multiple income streams. The more ways you can earn money, the more resilient you are. Build relationships and community. In times of economic crisis, having a strong network of people you can rely on is invaluable. Family, friends, neighbors, professional contacts. These relationships are wealth that can't be measured in dollars. Stay informed and stay flexible. The situation is evolving rapidly. What's true today might change tomorrow. Follow economic data. Watch currency movements. Monitor geopolitical developments. Be ready to adjust your strategy as new information emerges. Some people will accuse me of fear-mongering. They'll say, I'm exaggerating the risks. They'll point to experts who claim the dollar will remain dominant forever. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong about the timeline. Maybe the dollar survives longer than I expect. Maybe some miraculous policy change fixes everything. But here's the thing. The downside of being prepared is minimal. If you diversify your assets, buy some gold, reduce your debt, learn new skills, and the dollar doesn't collapse, what have you lost? Nothing. You're just in a stronger financial position. But the downside of not being prepared is catastrophic. If the dollar does collapse and you have all your wealth in dollars, you lose everything. Your life savings gone. Your retirement destroyed. Your financial future evaporated. From a risk-reward perspective, preparing is the only rational choice. The cost of being wrong if you prepare is small. The cost of being wrong if you don't prepare is enormous. And look, I want to be wrong about this. I don't want to see the dollar collapse. I don't want to see Americans suffer through hyperinflation and economic chaos. I'm not rooting for disaster. But wanting something doesn't make it true. Hoping for the best doesn't change the fundamentals. The math is the math. The history is the history. The patterns are the patterns. Every reserve currency in history has failed. The Spanish dollar failed. The Dutch guilder failed. The British pound failed. Why would the US dollar be different? What makes us special? What makes us exempt from the laws of economics that have governed every other empire? The answer is nothing. We're not special. We're not different. We're following the exact same path every other reserve currency has followed. And we're going to reach the same destination unless something fundamentally changes. And I don't see those fundamental changes happening. I see politicians kicking the can. I see the Fed printing money. I see debt growing. I see military spending continuing. I see manufacturing declining. I see denial and complacency. The trajectory is set. The outcome is predictable, the only questions are timing and magnitude. I know what I'm doing. I've already positioned my wealth for what's coming. I've diversified internationally. I own gold and silver. I've reduced my dollar exposure. I've built multiple income streams. I'm prepared. The question is, are you? Don't be the person who looks back in 2028 and says, I should have listened. Don't be the person who has to explain to your family why you didn't prepare when you had the chance. Don't be the person who loses everything because you couldn't accept that empires fall and currencies fail. Be the person who studied history, who recognized the pattern, who took action, who protected their wealth, who was ready. Your ancestors survived currency collapses. People have lived through these transitions before. You can too, but only if you prepare. So stop watching and start doing. Calculate your dollar exposure. Buy some gold this week. Open an international account. Reduce your debt. Diversify your assets. Take the first step today, because tomorrow might be too late. Because the tipping point might be closer than we think. Because once the rapid decline starts, you won't have time to prepare. If you found this video valuable, if it opened your eyes to the historical pattern we're repeating, share it with people you care about. Your family needs to see this. Your friends need to understand what's happening. Help spread this information. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to continue tracking the dollar's decline, the Fed's policies, and strategies for protecting your wealth through the transition. This story is just beginning. Leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. Do you see the pattern? Do you think the dollar will fail like previous reserve currencies? What are you doing to prepare? I read every comment. Thanks for watching. Stay informed. Stay prepared. And remember, every reserve currency in history has failed. The dollar won't be different.